I want to tell you a little story that I read in this book. This book is called The Patient Will See You Now. And the idea of this book was that we're living in a world with all kinds of information, and that information can be accessed by anyone. It doesn't really matter your age, as long as you have some willingness to learn, you can go find things out. So the story I want to tell you is about Angelina Jolie, and I didn't know this until reading this book. This book made it sound like everyone should know this, but I didn't know this. So in 2013, she was concerned that she carried a gene that would predispose her to breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And in 2013, there was a way offered up by this company, Myriad Genetics, that she could go find her proclivity, her possibility that she would have breast cancer or ovarian cancer. So she had the test done, and the test came back and said that she was 87% likely to have breast cancer. So she took it upon herself in a very bold move to have both breasts removed. And she wrote about this in the New York Times. And this decision came under a ton of scrutiny. A bunch of doctors and people in the medical profession said that this was crazy. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to pretend that this information that individuals can access is in the best interest of everyone, because people make bad decisions. So what happened then was there became this fight for that information. Who deserves the information? Should people have access to information, or should the government and government agencies protect that information, because that information in the wrong hands can be hurtful? So what I found interesting was then the fight that happened because of this. Okay, so what happened was when this news broke, maybe you know it, but there's a company out there, or was, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, I just read this. 23andMe, and what that allowed, it was a website that allowed you to access your DNA, okay? And The Patient Will See You Now is essentially a book saying, hey, we live in a world where people have access to information, and who ultimately should be in charge of that information. So 23andMe, they wanted to create a business model where individuals, Angelina Jolie or Kyle Wagner or anyone, could go and access their DNA and then act on that DNA. Well, what happened was the FDA stands for the Federal Drug Administration, Federal Drug Administration, and they took offense to 23andMe. They said that you have no right to benefit from this, because the Myriad Genetics had exclusive rights to that DNA. Okay, so apparently, again, I'm not an expert, I'm just trying to recall what I know. There's a gene out there that predicts your likelihood of getting breast cancer, and it was BRCA. Well, what happened was Myriad Genetics had a patent on that gene, and a patent means that they own the right for that gene. So when this company said, we want to capitalize on individuals' willingness to figure out their body, their DNA, that these individuals have this right, the FDA stepped in and said, you can't do that. We're going to block all your access to giving individuals that information. And Myriad Genetics had this patent. Okay, they applied for a patent. They owned the right to this gene, and the FDA blocked 23andMe. Well, they sued. Okay, I'm not exactly sure who sued, but the Supreme Court heard the case about are genes able to be patented, and if they were able to be patented, then these companies like Myriad Genetics would own the rights to all of our individual makeup. Well, shortly after Angelina Jolie's shortly after her editorial in the New York Times, the Supreme Court said that no, companies could not own those rights. So individuals had access to whatever they wanted. Now, so the good news is that information is out there, and companies cannot claim patents on our genes. That's good news, okay? Because if that were the case, then these things they'd be under lock and key, and we couldn't access it. But what still exists is this company had a head start on all of their data, and they're not willing to share it with a whole bunch of new companies, okay? So this company, okay, which is in the business of trying to make money, has some protection on our individual freedoms and I shouldn't say freedoms, our individual, in this case, our DNA, okay? So here's what I want you to think about, okay? When we had Mr. Metcalf come in and talk to us, he's part of a drug trial, okay? So potentially that drug trial company might be similar to Myriad. And what they have to do is they have to collect as many different samples as n equals, right, your sample size. They have to conduct as many different samples as they can to prove that this drug is viable, that this drug will benefit a large collection of people, so they can make their money, okay? So that's what is happening from Mr. Metcalf's standpoint. He's traveling to Buffalo, New York, and he is one of a sample size. And what that company, I'm assuming, is doing, I don't know otherwise, but this is the traditional method. They're going to compare their p-value to an alpha, and they're hoping that this drug can get approval from the FDA, so then they can market this drug, okay? And I'm not sure what that company is or what that product is, but they're trying to compare the P to the alpha. Now, the other day, I showed you something called a power law, okay? And what individual people do is individual people, they don't think in terms of a normal curve. They don't see themselves as one of many. They just see themselves as one. Like I'm the one person. And a good friend of mine uses the phrase, life is a single game player. And I'm gonna use that. Life is a single game player. In other words, you only got one shot at this, okay? So, you know, if it doesn't work, Mr. Metcalf was willing to try anything because, you know, you don't get to hit the reset button. And Angelina Jolie doesn't get to hit the reset button. So she doesn't care about who's got a patent on this thing. She just knows that if the tests come back 87% likely that she could get breast cancer, she wants an opportunity to cure that. So she had a double mastectomy and had both breasts removed. Well, and Mr. Metcalf just wants to be rid of this brain tumor. So in these power laws, all I want you to think about is a normal curve talks about what's average, how many standard deviations away from average are certain things, and then that says experts. Who are the experts that get to interpret those findings? Okay, that's the way a normal curve model works. works? Who are the experts that gets to interpret those findings? In a power law model, where life is a single game player, right? One game player. There is no average, there is no standard deviation, and there is no expert. You get to live your life as you see fit, and we're trying, because we live in an age where we can access so much information, we're just trying to do the best that we can do, okay? So this book, The Patient Will See You Now, the stories that they talk about involve individuals with companies and how the expert, otherwise known as the doctor, and the patient, right, the individual, they're in this constant interplay of battling between what is right, what is wrong, and what should be done and what shouldn't be done. And the more informed the patient gets, sometimes the harder it is for the doctor to navigate that industry, that medical industry. Okay, so I just want you to give some thought to Mr. Metcalf's situation, your situation, a student situation now that we're in quarantine, that we don't have access to experts as readily as we want. Yet, you have information available whenever you want. Whenever you want to turn your phone on, and you've heard me talk to you about those habit loops. So give some thought to that life is a single game player, and life is a power law, that you're not to be compared to average, all right? And it's not a matter of how many samples can you conduct. You are your own sample, and you need to navigate your world as best you see fit. And yet, you need to recognize that these people do exist to help you make decisions, okay? But it's just something that I want you to consider, and that we all have our individual choices, and then we all have our fears, our things that we're afraid of. In her case, it was her breast cancer. In our case, it could be something entirely different. But something I want you to consider with normal curves and power laws, and with respect to individuals and experts.